Hey, what's new and exciting? It's Kevin O'Shaughnessy here, and today I want to talk to you about vibrato. Now, I don't know if it's something that maybe you're overlooking in your playing, but I've been overlooking it in mine for a little while, and so I wanted to share a few insights that I hope might be helpful. So, first, let me share with you a quick story. Recently, I've been recording some music for a new EP. I wish I could tell you when it was going to be out, but it's been kind of a bear to record recently. It's kind of taken forever. Sorry about that. But at any rate, a couple of days ago, I was working on the solo for one of the songs, and I usually when I'm writing music for myself, I compose my solos. So I write the song, I play it, and I record it, and I listen back to it, and I think, wow, this kind of sucks. This doesn't sound very good at all, you know. And I'd spent some time recording it, and I was like, this isn't working out. So I go back to the next day and I listen to it again, and I say, well, yeah, this still really sucks. And but I listened to it a couple more times, and at first I'm thinking that just the whole solo sucks. I'm thinking the notes suck, the licks suck. It just doesn't. It's not working. But then I realized there are actually two things in the solo that were making it sound kind of amateurish, which is really what I didn't like. It wasn't the notes, and it wasn't anything there. It wasn't any of the licks. It was just that it sounded amateurish. And I thought, well, why is that? And there were two reasons. One of which I'm gonna talk about in this video, and then I'll address the second one in another video. But the first one was vibrato. My vibrato really sucked. Like, I haven't been doing it. Apparently, I haven't been practicing it for quite a while. And the other one was moving from phrase to phrase as I was moving along the neck. Those transitions didn't sound very good. It sounded very sloppy as I moved from one position of the neck to the next. So for anybody who makes their living in music, this is probably gonna. Some of this might be relatable. Some of this might just sound kind of stupid, but a lot of times, what I will do is I will gauge my practice around my professional obligations. So, for example, I used to play in a lot of musical theater pit bands, which is really good work. It's really easy work if you can get it, but it requires a lot of reading music, right? Which is something that I do, but that's something that when I've got a lot of shows like that in my schedule, then I do a lot of my practice is geared toward reading music and being able to interpret it in a creative way, right? But what I was realizing this time around was that I haven't had, for a while, I really haven't had a professional reason to practice vibrato. So it sort of fell off my list of things to do. Now, that's the part that might sound kind of stupid. But the thing is, a lot of my work is either writing and recording my own music, or recording and sometimes writing music for other aspiring songwriters. And 9 times out of 10, when I'm doing that kind of work, I'm strumming along chords, or I'm playing power chords in the rhythm section or something like that. So there's not a whole lot of shredding solos, or even emotional solos. There aren't a whole lot of solos in this work. It's just been the way it was. And the last time I did a gig, ever, I think, let alone playing my own music, was almost 5 years ago. So since then, I've either been writing music for myself, which doesn't really require, because you're in that creative standpoint, it doesn't necessarily require all of the nuances of performance, or I've been recording work for other people that doesn't require me to play anything melodically. So here I was playing this solo and kind of sucking at it because I hadn't practiced it in a while. So once I hadn't practiced those skills in a while. So once I figured out that those were the problems, the next day when I sat down to record, I spent probably the first half hour just working with the vibrato and just working with the transitions from phrase to phrase. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys. This is just a practical experience, just a practical lesson, right, based on an experience that I had recently, realizing where some of my own practicing had kind of really set myself up for failure. So let's get into it. So like I said, today we're going to talk about vibrato, and in the next lesson I'll talk about switching phrases in a solo, whether you're composing it or or whether you're improvising it. These are things that you want to be thinking about as you do it. So vibrato. What is vibrato? Right? To some of you, for any of you who might not know, it might seem a little strange because, of course, every time you pluck a string, it vibrates. Right? We pluck this string, it vibrates, and so we add a vibration to a vibration. Well, sort of. What we're doing when we create vibrato on any instrument is we are oscillating back and forth between the natural pitch that we're fretting and gently, or maybe not necessarily gently, but we pull it out of tune. We pull it sharp and then back to the original pitch. Now, of course, on other instruments like the voice, for example, you could also make it go flat instead of sharp. But on the guitar, we really only have one option. Unless we're using the whammy bar, we've only got one option, and that is to make the pitch go slightly sharp and then back to the original pitch. And we do that back and forth. And so the first thing you've got to do, if you want to develop a good professional sounding vibrato that you can use as an actual expressive technique, is you have to learn how to both hear and feel what the string under your finger, where it is when it's in its natural position and when you pull it out of tune. All right? Because a lot of times what happens when people are practicing vibrato, certainly when I was practicing it, is the pitch would always sound like it would go sharp and stay sharp. And that's because I didn't know how to recognize the feeling of when the string returned to its original tension, to the original pitch. And so that's the first thing you got to do. So all you need to do for something like this is to just pick a note. Right here, I'm on the C on the G string, which is at the 5th fret. Pull it slightly out of tune and then release it without releasing the note itself, right? You want to let that note ring and listen to what it sounds like first. Pull it out of tune, listen, release it, listen. And then as you're doing that, you do that a couple of times, then you want to feel it. So you play the pitch, stretch it out of tune, release it, and make sure you feel when your finger returns that it actually returns to that starting point. That's why this first one, like, you can't just pull it out of tune and start oscillating it back and forth and call that practicing vibrato. You have to know what it feels like before it's stretched out of tune. And especially if you're doing this during a practice session or a warm-up of some kind, then you really want to get to know. Every day you play the guitar, it's going to feel a little different. Okay? So every time you play, just start with that first note. Listen to it and take in the information of the sensations that are coming through your finger. How does that string feel underneath your finger? Okay, I'm harping on this because I think it's important. It's so important because a lot of times when we're playing, especially if we're playing in a live situation, whether we're reading music in front of us or we're engaging with an audience, we don't always get to look at what we're doing. So we have to pay very close attention to this tactile information that's coming through. Everything that's coming through our fingertips, everything that's coming through our hand. How does our arm feel? We got to pay attention to all of that kind of stuff. That gives us valuable information because we can't always watch what we're doing. So get a sense for what this feels, pull it out of tune, return it. And you might have to do that a few times before you can get the string to return exactly to where it started, to return to that neutral position. Okay? Now, when you feel fairly comfortable with that, there are two qualities of vibrato that you can mix and match. One is the width of the vibrato. Okay, so we can have a very narrow vibrato or a wide vibrato. And this has to do with how much we're pulling the string out of tune. So with a narrow vibrato, we're only going to be pulling it a little out of tune. And with a wide vibrato, it's going to be almost a trill. Right? So a trill is when you rapidly alternate between two notes. And you can get almost that same kind of a sound with a very wide vibrato. So width is the first quality. The second quality is the speed. All right, so we've got a slow vibrato and we've got a fast vibrato. Okay, and so those are the two qualities. So of course, if you mix them up, you've got a narrow slow vibrato, a narrow fast vibrato. You've got a wide slow vibrato and a wide fast vibrato. And those four things right there, obviously, yes. Before you start, yelling at me in the comments below, yes, there is gray area between all of those. But if you think about it in terms of those 4 points, it makes it a little easier to choose which vibrato you want in a given situation. So, the mechanics of doing a narrow vibrato, everybody does this a little differently. So for example, classical guitar players will take a vibrato and they'll rock their hand back and forth like this. You might not even be able to hear how subtle that is on an electric guitar. On a classical guitar, that's a little bit more pronounced. Tell you the truth, I'm not sure why, but if there's any classical guitar players watching this channel, hit me up in the comments and let me know. I'd love to hear it. I have a classical guitar. I play it from time to time, but I've never actually taken the time to figure out why that kind of vibrato is more pronounced. In my experience, it seems more pronounced on a classical guitar than on an electric. I almost can't hear this. This is a very subtle vibrato. So that's a subtle way of doing it. The way I do it is actually more of a back and forth wrist motion like this. You'll notice I have a lot of space between my hand and the neck. And I just move it down and up. And that's how I pull the string out of tune and back again. You know, this kind of motion. Now, if I want to make a wide vibrato, then what I'll do is I'll take this knuckle right here and I will plant it against the neck. And this gives me a point of leverage. All right, so now I can make a stronger bend with this. And I can get it. I can get it almost a half step up, which is that's pretty wide for a vibrato. Again, once you get into the range of the half step difference here, you're talking about a trill. But I can get that pretty wide. Okay, so those are the qualities, right? You've got narrow vibrato, wide vibrato, slow, and fast. So, for example, let's say you're playing a solo for a ballad. All right, so if you think about this, the tempo is going to be pretty slow. I don't know what the emotional content could be. Just about anything. It could be happy, it could be sad, it could be anywhere in between. It could be sarcastic, anything. But you're looking at what we might call a more lyrical solo, right? So in that case, anytime you sit on a long note might be a good opportunity for a narrow, slow vibrato. And the way that you can practice that is if you're tapping out of tempo. You don't have to use a metronome for this, although it might be a good idea depending on how well your own internal metronome works. The idea is to maybe start working it out as quarter notes, right? Or eighth notes maybe, where each tug is on the quarter note and each release is on the eighth note in between. So you're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. And actually what I need to do is this one, because I said I was going to do the more subtle one. So a narrow one. 2, 3, 4. Right, I'm actually pulling that a little wide now, right? So you see, I could practice that a little bit more. 1, 2. Right? Now, I don't know necessarily that I would ever do a vibrato that slow. I certainly haven't had a need for it so far. So the next step would maybe be to do eighth notes. So it'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and excuse me. 2, 3 and 4 and. Right? And of course then you could do triplets. 2 and 3 and 4 and eventually 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And you can hear the effect. Now, your job will then be to essentially assign an emotional characteristic to that vibrato. So to me, the eighth note vibrato is a really gentle but moving kind of sound. So I might use that in the solo or a melody for a love song or something like that, something where, right, it's not a very fast vibrato. There's nothing jarring about that. When you feel like you've got that down, then you can change positions and work on your wider vibrato. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can then move up to eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? Or the triplets. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Or 16th notes. 1 and 2. Ah, there's another one I got to do. That might be, let me see. So if the tempo's a little slower, I can do it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, to me, once you start getting into the fast, wide vibratos, that sounds a little frantic. So that might be the good thing. Like you hear that a lot. Listen to some Zakk Wylde solos and stuff. He'll even put pinch harmonics and stuff like that, and it sounds chaotic, which really works well in that context. Just like you did with the narrow vibrato, going from slow to fast. You want to do the same thing, assign an emotional characteristic to it, because that way, if you know the emotional content of the song that you're performing with, in that moment, you can choose which kind of vibrato is going to fit best. And you can choose it in the moment. You can plan it out ahead of time. That's really up to you. And the more you work with it, the more it becomes second nature. But as I discovered myself this past week, you do need to practice it. As a matter of fact, as you've seen here, I kind of still need to practice it a little bit more. But that's the thing you've got to do, is you've got to add a little bit of that nuance into your playing. And what I've discovered for myself is that it's not quite enough to just play your exercises with vibrato. It really is one of those things that deserves its own little piece of time, its own little chunk of time in your practice session, okay? Maybe just a couple of minutes. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to dedicate a half an hour a day to this, I don't think. But those are the things. So number one, let's just recap the steps. Number one, get used to what it sounds like and what it feels like to pull the note out of tune, to listen to the note, pull it out of tune, and then release it back to its original position, okay? Practice that first. Step number two, start getting familiar with the concept of wide vibrato and narrow vibrato. All right. So wide vibrato, we can use this knuckle on this. We can use this knuckle on the side of our hands here, right, to really use our finger as a lever and get that wide vibrato. That's not quite a half step. I wouldn't recommend getting it all the way up to that half step. It can be pretty close, but again, it's sort of a different technique when you get to the half step mark. And remember, each time, pay attention to the feeling of when that string gets back to its neutral position. And then the same thing with the narrow vibrato, right? Get a sense for what it feels like to pull it out of tune and let it return to neutral. And work that, and then when you're working out the speed for your vibrato, pick rhythms. Pull it out of tune on every quarter note, on every eighth note, on every triplet. And if you want to do every 16th note or more, you can. The last step would be to put it in a lick. Maybe do a, just anything that leads into a note that you want to add a little vibrato to. Anything like that. That would be a next step, so that you can get a little practice adding it to whatever it is that you want to play. And this can be, it doesn't have to be in a solo, it can be in a riff, whatever. But getting control of that string is going to be really important. And I would also say then too, also work with different fingers. The wide vibrato is not necessarily something, you really do need the first finger to do a wide vibrato, but the narrow one can be done on all of the fingers, on any of them. So that's worth practicing as well. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please leave a bunch of comments, ask me questions. I'll be happy to answer them. If you haven't done so already, of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell, and share this with anybody else you think might find it interesting. In the meantime, go practice, good luck, have fun, and I am Kevin O'Shaughnessy, and I will see you in the next video.